Have you ever wondered why professional mix engineers turn raw tracks into polished masterpieces within just a few hours, while so many aspiring producers find themselves stuck, tweak their mixes for days only to achieve subpar amateur sounding results? Having professionally mixed and mastered hundreds of songs for artists and labels in the electronic music scene that have gained millions of streams, were played at the biggest festivals and clubs, I can tell you that apart from experience, the biggest secret lies in the workflow. So in this video, I'm going to share with you the 3 biggest mixing workflow hacks that will make your mixes sound better, help you get to professional sounding results faster, and if you watch this video till the end, you will find out why limiting plays such a crucial role in this process. Let's start with a fun little challenge. I want you to listen to this section of the mix, and then later on, you let me know in the comments what you were focusing on. Let's go. If you're like most producers, you probably try to zoom in on tiny little details and nuances of the sound, trying to spot errors, trying to think about what are things that you can correct in the sound. And this is exactly the first big mistake that I was making early on in my career. Now, this huge gap between how most producers listen to their mixes and how most people later on listen to the music in clubs and festivals brings me to the first big workflow hack. I encourage you to mix like an artist and not like an engineer. If that sounds too abstract to you, let me show you what I mean. Listen to this section of the mix. This is in the peak part of the song where there's a lot of intensity. Now I want you to listen to the same section again, but this time look at the spectrum analyzer span. I'm dead sure that 99% of artists who are looking at these resonances here in the upper mid-range would go in and notch them out there. Coming from the lead sounds, it would be super easy to get rid of them. And this is exactly the wrong move. So here's the key takeaway for you. If you mix too much like an engineer and not enough like an artist, you are most likely killing the emotional essence of the song because you want to make everything perfect. You want to correct all the errors in the music. But on the other hand, if you mix like an artist and not so much like an engineer, you sometimes do stuff that is over the top or seems technically wrong, but that is exactly what you're supposed to do with music because you're making it exciting, and chances are you get away with this and people will actually give a damn about your music. Now, just to make this clear, it's absolutely essential to learn about all these technical intricacies, but you can store them in the back of your head and know when they are important and when they are not as important. But my personal mixing philosophy is to enhance the beauty in the sound instead of hunting for errors all the time. And I promise you that if you adopt this mindset shift in your mixing workflow, it will get you to better results faster. Now, the big question is, what else can we do in our session to make sure that we mix like an artist and not so much like an engineer without sacrificing technical quality, of course. Now, this is exactly why my next point is about session organization and the way you group your tracks. And to illustrate this, let me share a painful story with you. So a few years ago, I took on a mixing project for an unknown artist, and I kid you not, that person sent me 150 individual tracks in a song. So I started to mix this song, going through every individual track and trying to make it the best I can be. But the mix did not come together at all. I was listening to the result and it just felt super incoherent, did not make sense, and just didn't sound like a professional record. Now, after taking a break for a couple of days and thinking about my process, I actually came to a really crucial revelation that has revolutionized the way I mix music today. I asked myself one important question, and that is, how would I listen to this just in the club without knowing what's inside the session? And the answer is simple. I would not listen to the 5th layer of a specific hi-hat or shaker. I would listen to this in a few key groups that now became the main stems of my project. Let's go back to this project and simply look at the session. So as you can see, everything is color coded and I have a few key colors that I use. And this corresponds with the main stems that my project ends up in. And this becomes even more obvious if I collapse these main stems. So I have a kick stem, I have a drum top stem, I have a bass stem, a harmony stem, lead stem, special effects stem. And if I have vocals, I also have like a vocals stem. And those are the key components of every song, which reduces the amount of overwhelm significantly. So my second big workflow hack for you is to always use the same main group stems in every single mixing project. You can slot whatever song you want into these categories. So just to explain this a little bit to you, we have the kick stem, which always includes the different kick samples or maybe a kick synth. This is obvious. We have a drum top stem, which includes everything from hats to shakers to claps, other percussion sounds in the background. We have the bass stem that includes sub bass and upper basses. So some people put the sub bass into the kick stem. That's also fine if you want this. We have a harmony stem. This includes everything from atmospheres to chords and textures. We have a lead stem that contains different lead sounds. And we have the special effects stem. So these are just like cinematic hits and rises and stuff. And if I solo one of these groups, this always gives me an essential part of the whole piece. So it's almost like you have a couple of big puzzle pieces that once you put them together, make up the whole song. Now, if we take a closer look at one of those main stems, for example, the drum tops, you will see that inside this drum top stem, I have, for example, a hi-hat group that then consists of several hi-hat tracks. And the cool thing about this multi-layered approach is that it allows me to do broad strokes on the main stem. It allows me to do finer strokes on this subgroup, or it allows me to directly zoom in and fix something or enhance something in one of the tracks that it contains. But overall, it feels less overwhelming. It feels like I have total control over the mix. I can just quickly mute one of the groups. So let's say I play here and I just don't want to hear the drum tops. I can just simply mute the top stem and it will be taken out of the mix. And this is very practical if you want to make smart, quick decisions or just hear the mix in context in a different way. Now, the first two mixing workflow hacks that I've just shared with you are essential to get to great sounding mixes, but they are also completely worthless if you ignore the last one that I'm about to share with you now. Before we get there, if you got any value out of this video so far, then consider subscribing to the channel, consider liking this video. This helps me make progress, it shows me that I'm on the right track, but it also helps you because the algorithm will suggest better videos to you. Now, let's get to the final workflow hack that is crucial in my opinion. It has to do with limiting, and now you're going to find out why that is. To understand my final mixing workflow hack, you have to understand what happens in the mastering stage after you've exported your final mix. So in mixing, you work on all the individual tracks, maybe do a little bit of groups processing, maybe even do a little bit of mix bus processing, which is what happens on your master channel, and then you export that result to one stereo file that you send off to a mastering engineer, or you master it yourself later on. Now, the question is, what happens in mastering then? So whether you like it or not, one of the goals in mastering is to increase the perceived loudness of your music so that it competes with all the other tracks in your genre. And everyone who tells me that the loudness war is over has not listened to some of the contemporary releases these days. It has maybe changed, but it's definitely not over. I can tell you this, and most of my professional mastering colleagues would agree here. Now, how do mastering engineers typically do this? Well, it's most likely a combination of a little bit of intentional clipping, a little bit of compression, definitely some EQing to change the frequency response in a way that is perceived a bit more loud, and then also limiting in the end. Now, without a ton of experience, I would not advise you to try to mimic the whole mastering process in your mix already. But instead, you can use limiting as an approximation to what happens in the mastering stage, because limiting is still the most impactful change that happens in most dance music masters. And so my third and final mix workflow hack is to mix into a limiter at a certain point in your mixing process. And I will share with you when and how to do this. So here's my mix bus chain that I have on my master channel in Ableton. A little bit of FabFilter Pro Q, and as you can see, this is just a tiny bit of sweetening here and taking out a little bit of low mid-range there and a tiny cut to control the low end. I don't always do this, by the way. There's an EQ video where I share with you why and how to do this. I have a little bit of glue compressor, and then I go into the FabFilter Pro L2, which is the limiter that I prefer to use. Now, the big question is, how far are you pushing this limiter and when do you start using this in the mixing process? So I would not start the mixing process with the limiter engaged. I would actually go to 60, 70% finished mix where it starts to come together and like you have done a little bit of work on all the tracks that you want to work on or all the groups that you want to work on. And then you start engaging the limiter. You go to the loudest section of your track and then you look at the short-term LUFS and you simply push the gain of the limiter until you reach a competitive loudness level. And I would always listen to the short-term LUFS. This is the most important thing here because the integrated LUFS, this would just mean you integrate the loudness over the whole section of whatever you're playing. And if you play a super quiet breakdown and then go into the drop, it will just basically equal everything out. So this is a deep, more hypnotic techno track. They are not super pushed to the loudness extreme. So we're not talking about -6 LUFS. We're talking more about -8 to -10 LUFS. This would be the range where this music sits in. For your specific genre, go to a couple of your favorite reference tracks, throw them into an analyzer. I've made a great video about using loudness and also frequency analyzers there. You check for the short-term LUFS in the loudest section of these songs so you know what the competitive target is. Now my final comment on loudness here, and I feel like I have to say this as a mastering engineer. I personally don't care as much about the specific number that is there. I care mostly about the density of the track. So what is the perfect density that I can achieve in the master and where is the sweet spot? And that's different from track to track. And sometimes within the same genre, it's okay to be 2 dB quieter. That's completely fine if the density feels right. But now we still need to answer the question, how does this limiter actually help us make better decisions in the mixing process? So the cool thing about engaging a limiter towards the end of your mixing process is that it will reveal the flaws in your mix pretty significantly. So for example, your track could have too much sub bass. So I'm just increasing the sub bass channel here. And since you were too much in the weeds, you might not have noticed in the mixing process. But once you slap on the limiter, this will be revealed pretty significantly. So let's listen to this. And if you hear these heavy-handed artifacts, which you can engage by the listening function here in the FabFilter Pro L2, this shows you like how extreme those artifacts are. A little bit of crackling will always be there with limiting, but this is like an entire band of sound being taken away. And this is a clear indicator that you have way too much sub bass going on. Yeah, so these distortion or pumping artifacts are clear indicators that something is wrong in your mix. Otherwise, you would have been able to push it that high in the limiter. Mixing into a limiter can be a lifesaver. It prevents you from any bad surprises when sending stuff to mastering. It has been a true game changer for my own mixing workflow. I hope that it helps you as well. Leave a comment below and let me know what you think, what you found especially helpful. And if you need to know a little bit more about how to mix kick and bass specifically so that you don't run into these types of issues, I have a dedicated video over here that I really recommend you watch. See you in the next video. Until then, bye bye.